I have rules. Number 1, say no to drugs and alcohol. Number 2, if you're under 18, make sure a parent accompanies you to photo shoots or places unknown or other countries.
Drugs, alcohol, scandals. Janice Dickinson's story revealed the dark side of the word supermodel. That opening already feels like a plot twist, right? Because Janice Dickinson's life wasn't just about glamorous runways, Vogue covers, or Hollywood parties. Behind the spotlight, there were addictions, abuse, heartbreak, and endless scandals. So how did this woman both crown herself as the first supermodel and live one of the most chaotic lives in fashion? To find out, we need to rewind all the way back to her childhood. Janice Dickinson was born in 1955 in Brooklyn, New York, but she grew up in Florida. On the outside, it looked like a typical American family. On the inside, not even close. Her father was an alcoholic, controlling, and abusive. Her mother often stayed silent. Years later, Janice would describe her childhood as a nightmare lived in fear. Those early scars shaped her personality. From a young age, Janice became rebellious, sharp-tongued, and tough because she had to be. "My childhood taught me that you either become strong or you disappear," she once said. That edge would later set her apart in the fashion industry. But even as a teenager, Janice had one clear thought: I'm beautiful, and this beauty will open doors for me. At the time, the modeling industry in America was growing fast. Twiggy had defined the 1960s look, and now agencies were hunting for the next big thing. Janice wanted in. When she moved to New York in the 1970s, she started knocking on agency doors. That's when she hit her first big obstacle. Agencies wanted the all-American girl, type sweet, blonde, Barbie-like. Janice was the opposite. She was dark-haired, sharp-featured, with piercing eyes that looked more dangerous than sweet. Over and over, she was told, "You're too exotic, too wild." So what did Janice do? Did she back down? Nope, not today. She doubled down. If one agency rejected her, she went to another. If one photographer said no, she kept pushing until someone said yes. Finally, she caught the attention of Jacques Silberstein, a photographer who saw something different in her. Janice didn't look like the standard beauty of the time. She looked unforgettable. By the mid-1970s, her photos started appearing in magazines. Soon she was landing spreads in Harper's Bazaar and Vogue. And here's the key: Janice wasn't just noticed for her face. It was her attitude. On shoots, she spoke up, pushed back, and demanded what she wanted. Most models stayed quiet, but Janice was loud, fiery, unapologetic. To some, she was difficult. To others, she was exactly what the industry needed: a woman who broke the rules. Think about it. Sometimes being too much is exactly what makes you unforgettable. And that was Janice Dickinson in a nutshell. Her rise picked up speed. She walked runways, graced countless covers, and by the late 70s and early 80s, she was everywhere. But Janice wasn't satisfied with just being called a model. She wanted more. So she declared herself the first supermodel. That claim sparked endless debate. After all, Cindy, Naomi, Linda, and Christy were also in the conversation. But Janice stood firm. "I coined the term. I was the first." Whether or not that's historically true, it showed you exactly who she was: bold, unapologetic, and unafraid to stir the pot. But here's the part most people missed. Behind the confidence and the sharp tongue was a deeply fragile woman. The trauma from her childhood followed her into adulthood. The pressure of the industry only made it worse. Drugs and alcohol became her escape. On the runway, she was fierce and untouchable. Offstage, she was fighting demons no one could see. In the next chapter, we'll dive into Janice Dickinson's rise to full-blown superstardom, her Vogue and Harper's Bazaar shoots, her unforgettable runway moments, and how she built the reputation of being both an icon and a troublemaker. Because even in the middle of chaos, she knew how to stay in the spotlight. By the late 1970s, Janice Dickinson was no longer the too exotic girl agencies had once dismissed. She was becoming one of the most unforgettable faces in fashion. Photographers loved her sharp cheekbones, fierce eyes, and unapologetic confidence. In a way, Janice didn't rise because she was traditionally beautiful. She rose because she had an attitude, one of her First big breaks came when she landed a Harper's Bazaar shoot. Being photographed by Richard Avedon, one of the greatest fashion photographers of all time, changed her trajectory. Avedon saw what others had missed. Janice wasn't just a model. She was a force. In his lens, she wasn't simply wearing clothes, she was embodying an era. Soon after, Vogue covers started rolling in. By the late 70s and early 80s, you couldn't flip through a major fashion magazine without spotting Janice Dickinson's face. And let's be real, back then, a Vogue cover was basically the equivalent of going viral on social media today. Instant recognition. Instant fame. On the runway, she stood out even more. Her walk was bold, commanding, almost shouting, "I'm here. Watch me." While other models floated gracefully, Janice brought energy that made people whisper. That escalated quickly. Designers loved it because she wasn't just showing clothes. She was breathing fire into them. Versace, Valentino, Oscar de la Renta, Calvin Klein, everyone wanted her. At Versace shows in particular, Janice became a fan favorite. When she stepped onto the runway, it wasn't just fashion, it was theater. But it wasn't just her modeling that built her legend. Janice knew how to craft an image. In interviews, she was blunt, cutting, and never afraid to speak her mind. She criticized rival models, clashed with industry insiders, and boldly declared, "I'm the first supermodel. I invented the word." Was it true? Debatable? Did it matter? Not really. Because sometimes confidence leaves a bigger mark than facts. And Janice's claim helped cement her as an icon in fashion history. By the early 1980s, Janice was one of the highest-paid models in the world. Luxury campaigns, million-dollar contracts, international runways, it looked like she had it all. But the higher she climbed, the more chaotic her personal life became. Her schedule was brutal, constant flights, endless shoots, wild parties. And with that lifestyle came drugs and alcohol. The fashion scene of the 80s was drenched in excess, and Janice was right in the middle of it. And yet, despite her addictions, Janice kept showing up. She could party all night and still strut down a runway the next morning like nothing happened. Honestly, she was living proof of the phrase, "Fake it till you make it." Of course, the press loved her. She wasn't just a model, she was tabloid gold. Headlines followed her everywhere, mixing her achievements with her scandals. In a sense, she was building the mythology of the supermodel while also exposing its cracks. Because here's the twist. While Janice was the face of beauty, she was also the voice exposing fashion's dark side. She openly talked about the industry's cruelty, the pressures on women, and the toxic culture behind the cameras. Was she sabotaging herself? Maybe, but she was also pulling back the curtain on a world that looked perfect from the outside. By the mid-1980s, Janice Dickinson was at her peak. But the warning signs were already there. The addictions, the scandals, the chaos, they were building towards something bigger. And just like in every drama, the rise was only half the story. In the next chapter, we'll explore Janice Dickinson's peak years, her most iconic collaborations, how she embodied the fashion trends of the era, and the first cracks in her empire. Because with Janice, the spotlight always came with shadows. By the mid-1980s, Janice Dickinson had officially reached her peak. She wasn't just another model, she was the name people whispered about in fashion circles. What made her unforgettable wasn't a cookie-cutter beauty. It was her energy, her fire, and her refusal to play nice. If Janice was on a magazine cover, sales spiked. If she hit the runway, eyes were glued to her every step. One of her most iconic partnerships was with Gianni Versace. He loved Janice's wild, defiant energy and made her one of his star models. Versace's bold, colorful designs paired with Janice's fierce stage presence? Pure magic. The press even dubbed her Versace's rebellious angel. Her collaborations with legendary photographers only solidified her image. Richard Avedon, Irving Penn, Helmut Newton, all of them shot Janice. And in Newton's lens especially, she became something entirely new, dangerous yet feminine, powerful yet fragile. Those photographs weren't just fashion, they were statements. And honestly, Janice was the perfect face for the 1980s. This was the decade of excess big shoulders, neon colors, bold makeup, over-the-top everything. And Janice embodied that energy. She wasn't trying to be subtle. She was the living definition of too much is never enough, but with the spotlight came the shadows. The cracks were starting to show. Janice wasn't just the queen of the runway anymore, she was also the queen of scandals. The tabloids followed her every move. Late-night parties, clubs, fights, love affairs, it was all part of the Janice brand. And she wasn't hiding any of it. Drugs and alcohol had become normal in her world. In interviews, she sometimes flat out admitted it. Once, when asked about cocaine, she shrugged and said, "Yeah, I did it. Who in this business didn't?" That blunt honesty shocked the public, but also revealed a truth about the fashion industry most people didn't want to hear. Still, no matter how chaotic her personal life got, she kept working. Janice could stumble out of a party at dawn and still own the runway hours later. She was basically the embodiment of spill the tea but get the job done. But the fashion world was shifting. By the late 80s, trends were changing. Softer, younger, more all-American faces were taking over. And Janice, now in her 30s, was facing the brutal truth. The industry was ready to move on. That was devastating for someone who had built her entire identity around being the first supermodel. Imagine spending years declaring, "I'm the top," only to see the spotlight shifting to the next generation. That hit her pride hard, and of course, the media loved to document her downfall. Once the darling of Vogue, Janice now found her name splashed across tabloids for her addictions, fights, and scandals. She went from glossy magazine covers to sensational headlines, but Janice never stayed quiet. She was still loud, still unapologetic. "Yes, I've made mistakes, but I'm still here," she would say. At one point, she even declared, "I may fall, but no one can extinguish my light." And honestly, that line captures her perfectly: chaotic, messy, but endlessly resilient. In the next chapter, we'll dive into Janice Dickinson's scandals and crises, the messy relationships, the addiction battles, the breakdowns, and the controversies that nearly destroyed her. Because if her rise was dramatic, her fall was pure chaos. By the late 80s and early 90s, Janice Dickinson's life had turned into a whirlwind of chaos. Once the darling of Vogue and the star of Versace's runways, she was now splashed across tabloids under very different headlines. Queen of Scandal, the fallen supermodel. Chaos in high heels, her biggest struggle. Drugs and alcohol. Cocaine, booze, pills, they became part of her daily routine. And instead of hiding it, Janice often flaunted it with shocking honesty. In interviews, she'd say things like, "Yeah, I did coke." Who didn't in this industry? That bluntness horrified some fans, but also peeled back the curtain on fashion's hidden reality. But the addictions didn't just sabotage her work, they wrecked her relationships too. And trust me, Janice's love life could fill an entire Netflix drama. Mick Jagger, Sylvester Stallone, Jack Nicholson, Hollywood's biggest names were linked to her. And nearly every romance ended in fireworks, the most infamous. Her scandal with Stallone. Janice claimed she was pregnant with his child. Stallone, believing her, even took the relationship seriously. But then came the DNA test. The baby wasn't his. Overnight, Janice went from supermodel to tabloid spectacle. It was brutal. At the same time, the fashion industry was shifting. The 90s brought in new faces: Kate Moss, Cindy Crawford, Claudia Schiffer. Janice's fiery personality, once her biggest weapon, now seemed too much. The woman who had once been celebrated for breaking rules was suddenly labeled outdated. Imagine it, one day, you're the first supermodel, the next, you're being called yesterday's news. That ego crash had to be devastating. And of course, the press made it worse. Instead of Vogue covers, Janice was landing on tabloid front pages. Instead of fashion spreads, she was being photographed stumbling out of nightclubs. She had become a scandal machine? But here's the thing about Janice. She never stayed silent. If anything, she got louder. And this time, she turned her voice against the very industry that made her. She started calling out fashion's dark side: agency pressure, sexual harassment, the drug culture that everyone pretended didn't exist. Her boldest accusations came in the late 90s and 2000s, when she openly named famous photographers and producers who had assaulted her. At the time, people rolled their eyes and branded her attention-seeking. But fast forward to the #MeToo movement years later. And suddenly, Janice's words looked less like drama and more like truth. She'd been ahead of her time. Still, in the 90s, those revelations didn't help her career. Brands distanced themselves, agencies dropped her, and her reputation spiraled further. By the mid-90s, Janice Dickinson was no longer the reigning queen of fashion. But she wasn't gone either. She pivoted into TV shows, talk appearances, and interviews, always reminding people, "I'm the first supermodel." Her chaotic personality kept her in the headlines even when the fashion world tried to forget her. But her personal struggles only deepened. Rehab stints, toxic relationships, money problems. Her life became a storm. And yet, in true Janice fashion, she refused to disappear. "Yes, I've messed up my life, but I'm still standing," she said more than once. That line summed her up perfectly, self-destructive but unbreakable. In the next and final chapter, we'll explore how Janice Dickinson clawed her way back. From reality TV fame to writing tell-all books, she managed to reclaim her story on her own terms. And we'll look at how, despite all the chaos, she carved a permanent place in fashion history. Because Janice's story isn't just about a fall, it's about survival. By the late 90s and early 2000s, Janice Dickinson was no longer ruling fashion runways. The era of Cindy, Naomi, and Kate had taken over. But if you think that meant Janice was gone, think again. Her real superpower wasn't just modeling, it was surviving. Like a phoenix, she kept rising from her own ashes. Janice pivoted into television. In 2003, she joined America's Next Top Model as a judge. Under Tyra Banks' leadership, the show was about finding the next generation of models. Janice, of course, brought her trademark chaos. Blunt, brutally honest, sometimes mean but always real. Viewers either loved her or hated her. But no one ignored her. She also started her own agency, the Janice Dickinson Modeling Agency, which turned into a reality show. Working with young models, Janice showed the glamorous and not-so-glamorous sides of fashion. And naturally, the drama followed her because with Janice, there's no such thing as boring. Beyond TV, Janice also put her life into words. Her memoir, No Lifeguard on Duty, shocked readers. She revealed childhood trauma, addiction battles, industry pressure, and even her experiences with sexual assault. It wasn't sugar-coated, it was raw and unapologetic. Some people were horrified, others admired her bravery. Either way, she proved something. Very few celebrities dared to tell their stories with such brutal honesty. Throughout the 2000s, she became a staple on reality TV, late-night shows, and interviews. Her energy was unpredictable, her words unfiltered. Watching her was like sipping hot gossip. You never knew what tea she was about to spill. And then came the #MeToo movement. Suddenly, Janice's past accusations about sexual assault, long dismissed as attention-seeking, took on new weight. She testified against Bill Cosby, recounting her experience as one of his victims. For years, people had rolled their eyes at her. But when Cosby was convicted, it validated what Janice had been saying all along. She wasn't just causing drama. She had been telling the truth before the world was ready to hear it. Looking back now, Janice Dickinson's story isn't just about scandals, addictions, or messy love affairs. It's about a woman who refused to be silenced. She fought against the system, even when it cost her jobs, credibility, and peace of mind. So what's her legacy? First, she branded herself the first supermodel. Whether or not that's factually true, the boldness of the claim made history. She put the idea out there, and decades later, people are still debating it. Second, she brought honesty to an industry built on illusions. While most models stayed quiet, Janice called out the dark side: drugs, exploitation, and abuse. She ripped the mask off fashion. And third, her resilience. She messed up countless times, lost her career, wrecked her image, but she never disappeared. Every time she clawed her way back. That's why people still remember her, not as perfect, but as a survivor. Think about it. Maybe that's why Janice's story still resonates. Because it's not flawless, polished, or sugar-coated.
It's messy.
It's raw. And it's real. Janice Dickinson proved that you can fall apart and still stand tall again. She was light and shadow, beauty and chaos. And that's exactly why, decades later, we're still talking about her.